it's time for the final piece of the afternoon, which is our panel conversation and Q&A. So be thinking about questions for anybody on the panel. I think you know everybody, of course. Rupert, we have Daisy Cooper here, thank you. We have Ruth, we have Catherine. So any questions you have for any of those, please get those ready. But I wanted to start with like a sort of conversation opener. And this is for you, Daisy, if that's okay, because sadly, you know, you haven't been able to be here the rest of the afternoon, but I know you've been briefed on the context that we've been talking about. So where are you on the kind of whether we're 5 to midnight or 5 past midnight? What do you really think?
Thank you. Well, it is 5 past midnight. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's what all the evidence says, right? You know, if you're an evidence-based policymaker, as I like to think that I am, we have to adapt. We have to adapt very quickly, and there's no doubt that we have to do that from the bottom up and from the top down. One can't work without the other. We do need both. I see my role as the MP for St Albans as doing a little bit of both. Part of my role is in Parliament, trying to force the government to go faster, to be bolder, to be more strategic, to work cross-party where we can, and where we can't, to make a nuisance of ourselves on the opposition benches. And some of you will know that I've been trying to be very active on these issues. I'm Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Climate Change. I worked with a think tank to get a policy tracker up and running. I've written to the COP26 President to ask him whether he will use that tracker and start reporting on it in Parliament. Now we have the cost of living crisis. It's clear that part of the answer to the cost of living crisis is reducing the amount of energy that we use. We know renewables are cheaper. It feels like we have to make these arguments over and over and over again, but increasingly they are sensible, economically sensible arguments, as well as climate coherent arguments. The other part of my role, as I see it, isn't in Parliament. It's actually trying to make links here in our community. So, as some of you will know, I try my best to go out and meet as many different groups as possible in St Albans. And often there are lots of different groups of people that don't know about each other or haven't particularly met up. And I'll give you sort of two or three quick examples. One, you will know that Affinity Water, not necessarily a friend of mine, I have to say. I do pick up quite a few fights with them on all sorts of issues. But Affinity Water, to their credit, did try to run a water-saving campaign. And I was pleased to work with them to promote that, and it actually helped us to save water across St Albans, and they're rolling that model out. A second is that I was having a big old moan to National Highways about some of their road surfaces and how noisy they were. And I discovered in the course of a conversation that they have a budget for planting trees. So I put National Highways in touch with our local council, and they've now done a tour of the district to find places to plant trees. And most recently I met with the Royal Entomological Society in Chiswell Green, and they are very keen to work again with our district council to look at how we can scope out green corridors right across the district and perhaps right across Hertfordshire. We haven't got that up and running yet, but making those connections is certainly a part of what I can do. So I do think it's 5 past midnight, and I'll do all I can to push things in Parliament, as well as to play my part in coming to events like this, meeting different groups and trying to make connections where I can.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. That's really good to hear. Really good to hear you acknowledging things clearly in that way. I would love to hear you making a similar kind of case in Parliament and at Liberal Democrat Conference and so on and so forth, because it seems to me that it's very difficult for politicians to do this, but it's essential. It's very difficult for politicians to go to people not with a story of, if you do this and vote for me, then everything will be fine, but with a story of, it's way too late for everything to be fine, everything is not fine, everything is not going to be fine. To stop things from becoming absolutely mind-blowingly dire, we need to take serious action on the basis of admitting to the failures to date and the extent to which actually we've all been part of those failures. And the Lib Dems, when they were in government, were part of that, but not just that. The extent to which politics as a whole and the system as a whole has failed us thus far. And that's partly why we're in the mess that we are. And to the extent that you're able and willing to do that in diverse forums, that will be really groundbreaking and fabulous.
I just wanted to build on that. Last week I met Lord Deben, the chair of the UK Climate Change Committee, and in Hertfordshire, where he was giving a talk, and fabulous guy, really, didn't expect to like him, but I did, really great orator, but was kind of very much towing the party line, even though he hates this government, and was very clear about that. But, net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. So I heard the same old thing.
Do you want me to respond to that? Or Sure. I mean, I think one of the frustrations for me, I mean, it's a win, but it's a frustration, is that the only thing that we hear about all the time in Parliament, and I've voiced this frustration myself, is about net zero. Now, net zero is important, but actually we need to catch up on the ecological emergency as well. That's something that isn't being tackled. And the planning system, I didn't really go into politics to get interested in planning, but my goodness, am I interested in planning these days? Because if you think about some of the challenges to do with adaptation, so much of it comes down to planning. If you build more houses and you have more roofs, you're going to have more runoff. If you have more runoff and you don't have decent sewers, then it's going to flood your street. If that water combines with your sewerage, then you're going to end up with sewerage in your rivers. If you have sewerage in your rivers, then your insects are going to die, and it's not going to be somewhere that's safe for people to swim, and that's bad on your mental health and your physical well-being. All these things have a knock-on effect. And it's hugely disappointing to me that the most recent Queen's speech was supposed to have something in it on planning, and it's not. There isn't now going to be a separate planning bill, but there's going to be this levelling up bill, which I think is going to become a little bit of a Christmas tree piece of legislation. And by that I mean that it's so broad that everyone's going to try and hang things on it. That said, there is an opportunity to try and raise these issues of adaptation in the levelling up bill by saying these are the kind of things that we should be looking at because of climate inequalities that are going to become even more stark than they are already. So, I share that frustration, which is that there isn't actually enough talk about climate in Parliament. Part of the reason for that is because there isn't a climate department anymore. And if you don't have a climate department, then there isn't really a climate minister. And if there isn't a climate minister, then you don't get climate questions. And if you don't get climate questions, then journalists don't write about what parliamentarians are asking about on the climate. So it really has been condemned to the backbenches and to the sidelines of Westminster Hall debates. And there are many of us who are trying. You can decide how successful it is, but some of us are really trying to raise awareness with ministers both behind the scenes and in the chamber, but it does, it is increasingly frustrating, and I recognise your frustration that it feels a bit blah blah blah.
Thank you so much, Daisy, and do come in, ladies.
I was just going to, I was just going to pick up on you said that we needed to be top down and bottom up, and some of the experience that I've had with the climate emergency centres. We were actually really surprised at how much positive response there was from councils when we took plan to them. However, there are some that aren't, and they go there and they get nothing back. And even when there is that positive response, there's very little that the councils know how to do. And I guess there's something about, if we want the bottom-up to happen, there needs to be that support there, that something coming back, that responsiveness to engage with them, that's led by what the communities are saying they're going to do. And how can there be something happening that allows that to happen, that's actually the council supporting the communities to do what they need to do.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Hopefully, people in this room will know that our council, when the Liberal Democrats took control, the very first thing they did was to declare a climate emergency. There is a forum set up. There are conversations that happen with community groups. I know that, for example, in South Cambridgeshire, they've just been up for an award for some of their climate work, and I think Wokingham as well. So there are some councils that are reactive, and there are some councils that aren't. Fundamentally, you can't force people to do things if they don't want to do them, if they're a ruling administration. So really, there's sort of two angles to it. One one is the carrot and one is the stick. There is the Local Government Association. The Local Government Association is a sort of umbrella organisation for all councils of all colours, and the LGA does endeavour to bring councils together to discuss these kinds of issues, and the LGA provides briefings and exchanges best practice. So those councils that are hungry to tackle the climate emergency in its broadest sense can work with other local councils to find out what they should be doing and learn lessons. But if there is a council that is not willing to take this issue seriously, then quite frankly, talk to your friends and mobilise, because the only way to do that is to get involved in party politics and kick them out.
Fabulous, thanks. So do wave at me, any of you, if you'd like to take the mic back. But let's throw it open to questions now, or just observations, things you want to say to us. So we have John over here.
Thank you. So, afternoon. There's a bill called the Energy Security Bill, having its second reading on the 21st of July. Coincidentally, another private member's bill has been working its way through the Commons called the Local Electricity Bill. And judging by the conversation around the table, local electricity seems to be one of the keys to local resilience and to unlocking the local economy. My question is, how can the provisions of the local electricity bill be incorporated, or make sure they're incorporated into this energy security bill? Thank you.
Great question. So the local electricity bill, as you say, is a private member's bill. And for those who are not up on the technical wonkery of Parliament, private members' bills very rarely go into law. They are an opportunity for backbenchers to put an issue on the government's agenda. Every now and then there's about sort of maybe 5 to 10 every year that do go into law, but there's hundreds every year, and often they just flag up an issue. The local electricity bill has been tabled in Parliament a number of times by MPs of different parties. My recollection is there's about 180-something MPs that currently support the local electricity bill. I'm included in that, don't worry. I'm listed, I think, on their website as one of their supporters. I've written to the government, I think, 2 or 3 times about the bill and asked them whether or not they will take it forward. In the most recent response, I can't remember the exact detail, but if you email me, I will send you the letter from the Minister. In the most recent response, the Minister responded in a favourable way and said he was sort of attracted to the idea of what's in the local electricity bill, but there was a sort of technical issue that the campaign was calling for that had to be worked out somehow. So I'm glad that you flagged it again, and I will see whether it's considered in scope, and if it is within scope of the energy security bill, then we'll see whether we can table an amendment to put something in.
Just a little thought about how we might proceed on some of these matters where the current legislative situation is pretty unsatisfactory and maybe not about to change. There are some aspects of some of these things, such as, for example, the potentialities for local energy generation and community energy projects and so on, where it would be quite feasible for a group of citizens who are minded to do so to simply go ahead and do it. And to then effectively dare the government to tear down something or prosecute something which was obviously something that was good, that had lots of support. Now, you might say, well, is that the radical flank again? I'm not really sure how you classify it. It's different from anything the radical flank's done in recent years, where what we did in Extinction Rebellion, for example, was deliberately set out to get arrested and to protest and to make demands and so on. This would be actually going ahead and doing something which was widely taken to be common sense, and then saying, look, we hope you'll just let us do it. You could come in and prosecute us and tear it all down, and maybe we put up a turbine and you're going to rip it down again. Do you really want to do that? Do you really want to risk that appalling publicity that would result from any government or local authority or police force or whatever who did something like that? So that, to me, is an idea for a kind of a whole slew of potential sort of intermediate actions, which I think would be a place where, if you will, the moderate flank could build on what the radical flank has done and do the kind of thing that could have really mass appeal. that would actually be making the kind of difference we need to make?
Okay, so, yeah.
This is an observation in reading all the great contributions all the way round, is that very few of us on paper have mentioned the fact that we live in a multicultural community. And all of the things that we've talked about involve the multicultural community. And I just wanted to say that that was an observation of mine, that we can learn a lot from people who've come from other countries. We can learn a lot about ourselves from people who we don't know. And we should be getting to know. And that's just an observation. Thank you.
Yeah, really good one. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
I think really all I'm wanting to do is agree with you very, very loudly. So with my Sustainable St Albans hat on, one of the events that we had both this year and last year in the Sustainability Festival programme, which was run by the Hearts Asian Women's Association, was called From Global to Local. And it featured real stories of climate-damaged and polluted communities in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and work that was being done to try and raise money and get projects going to help that. And what came over so strongly from it was that where you have those connections to countries that are being impacted now and people that are being impacted now, it makes it so clear and so real that this isn't tomorrow's problem, this is today's problem. And I see the same thing at the church in that each diocese has a linked diocese or more than one linked diocese abroad. And one of the most powerful things is getting people from the linked diocese to speak, which the wonders of Zoom allows now. Getting people from those linked dioceses who are suffering now with drought, with famine, with fires, with landslides, and getting them to speak at events of saying, this is now for us. These are our livelihoods, that our land is becoming unlivable now, that it's not safe for our children now. And it's when you hear another human being who is suffering personally today because of these issues, I think that it gives it an urgency which in Hertfordshire is sometimes hard to feel.
My question is for Rupert, talking about action in the workplace, but you didn't mention strike action at all, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on general strike and reflecting on how the youth strike movement happened, but then adults didn't follow through and support their demands for a strike in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's how I think it could go. If we were to just call right now, as some people have done, for a general strike over the climate situation, etc., I think we wouldn't get anywhere. But here's how we might get somewhere. Imagine if the moderate flank kind of really gets going in a lot of workplaces, institutions, industries. Imagine if through trade unions, which of course I did mention, and through professional associations and whatever, people got organized in the law, in advertising, in audit, in insurance, in the transport industry, in cleaning. It's relevant absolutely everywhere, of course. This is a agenda that's relevant completely everywhere. Imagine if people got organized in all those places and started trying to push their employers or their organizations, etc., in the right direction to do the right thing on climate, on ecology, on cost of living, etc. And then imagine that they start to experience pushback, and some of them will definitely experience pushback. Not every employer, not every institution is going to say, oh yeah, that's a brilliant idea, we never thought of it, but now you've told us we're going to do 100% of what you ask. It's not quite going to go like that. When people start getting pushback, after they've got organized, when they are making entirely reasonable demands, which are completely obvious and commonsensical, actually, in the environment that we now live in, to more and more of us, that, it seems to me, is the kind of moment where it could make sense to people to up the ante a bit and to start doing things like 30-minute stoppages, for example, which are much more difficult for employers or the government to clamp down on than full-scale strikes. And there's all sorts of other things you can imagine, work to rule, imagine a sort of eco-work to rule, right? We're gonna do everything by the book in such a way that it works not just for the good of the employees and for their health and safety, but for the broader ecological good as well, something like that. If we get to that kind of point and you get pushback on completely kind of reasonable demands and organizations and pressures, then it seems to me you could move to the point of saying, this isn't on, we're going to take strike action over this. And to cut straight to the chase of where I agree with you 100%, if our children can do it, then sooner or later so can we. Right? If our children can do it, then sooner or later so can we. So, yeah, my answer to your question is absolutely. I don't think we get there straight away, but I could see us getting there in 18 months, 2 years, something like that, and it could be immensely powerful and important.
Brilliant. Thank you, and a great question. Okay, I was just going to say, for me, first, there needs to be a step which is awareness and education. You know, you're all here because you're already educated and aware, otherwise you wouldn't have signed up. You go and take 500 people at random in St Albans, out there today. There really is, as Alex Steffen, my quote this morning says, a huge gap between how bad it is and how bad people think it is. So I think, first of all, there's an education awareness raising piece, and that's what the media, I think, mainstream media isn't doing.
Just very quickly on that, yes, absolutely. That's why we need to tell the 5 past midnight story, right? That's why you need to make sure that the next time somebody says to you, it's too late, or in some ways more importantly, the next time somebody says to you, oh, it's going to be okay, aren't they? They're going to get it sorted out, the governments are working on it, the businesses are working on it, Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace and XR, they're all working on it. You need to say to them, look, it's already 5 past midnight, we're already in the danger zone, there's already so much vulnerability in the developing world, but also here. And Britain's been lucky so far. We've been really lucky. That luck isn't going to hold. Pretty soon, we will have an event like Australia have had, or like Germany have had, or like the west coast of America have had. Pretty soon. It'll be this year or next year, almost certainly, unless we're just stupendously lucky. My bet is that it could be wildfires, for example. We've got pitiful preparation for dealing with wildfires in this country. They could absolutely take out huge amounts of this country if there is a really long, hot summer. But, it could be all sorts of things. We are intensely vulnerable, and the more we tell that story now and illustrate it, the more we're preparing people and engaging in that kind of culture shift, which makes the kind of potentiality for what you want and I want in the workplace to happen.
Just very quickly, I mean, in my experience, and this may not be representative of the whole country, but in my experience as an MP, I am yet to find an organisation that doesn't want to do more to tackle the climate emergency. So I guess I would question, what would you want to get out of striking in the workplace? I mean, there may well be some workplaces that are resistant to changes. There are some employers in St Albans that want to reform the business rate system because if they put solar panels on their business property, then their business rates go up. There are employers that have written to me about the cost of living crisis, saying, could you petition the government to allow an employee expenses to cover a discount towards fuel bills and things like that. I mean, I'm not saying that all business is perfect, because a lot of big business is not, but certainly I think small businesses in our community are definitely trying to do their bit. And my experience overall is that residents, citizens, employees, employers, everybody I speak to is chomping at the bit to do more. And the real question is, why then isn't more happening? You know, yes, they're all kind of petitioning the government, because the government does have to lead on some things. But I do think that with all of these organisations wanting to do something, for me it's a real question about how we harness that appetite, that real drive for more to happen, and find ways for them to be sort of practical and to change communities.
I just wanted to pick up on the awareness side of things and the awareness raising. One of the conversations I was having over there earlier was about that even our awareness dips in and out. And sometimes it's not so much about knowing, it's about being able to hold on to knowing. And you walk out there and there's no messages apart from buy more, have this, get this, have fun here, do this. And those messages to kind of stop us from staying in that awareness. We need to change our communities so it's everywhere. So we're stepping into that space of we are taking action now together. And you can see it in every single experience and everything you see around you.
A question that relates to awareness and education, but also to Daisy's point about bottom up and top down. It's a question that relates to awareness and education, and also the bottom up and top down that Daisy talked about. Some weeks ago, a member of the public went on hunger strike outside Parliament with a sole demand that all members of Parliament be given the same briefing about the facts of the climate emergency that the Prime Minister had received from the Chief Scientific Officer. And Greg Hands, the Minister, did relent and say that that would happen, and also that it would be publicised, or made public, sorry. Has it actually happened, can Daisy report, and what effect did it have? Or has it not happened, but there's a date for it?
I actually received an email, I think, on Thursday or Friday in the last couple of days, setting the date for it. So it hasn't happened yet. I can't remember off the top of my head, but something around the 20-something of July, I think, is when it's going to happen. But it is a confirmed date now, and Patrick Vallance will be available to brief MPs. Yeah.
One word on that, don't expect it to change everything overnight. The content of the briefing will probably be pretty middle of the road and pretty 5 to midnight, in my opinion and experience, I'm afraid. So it was a great victory, but we need a lot more where that came from. I do think Daisy is right, though, to say that there is a lot of appetite now. There is a lot of appetite in a lot of organisations among a lot of people to do something. What we need to do is we need to deepen that by getting people to understand the 5 past midnight aspect. And we need to capitalise on it. We need to make it happen. And that's what the moderate flank is all about. That's what the Climate Emergency Centre and what Catherine is doing is all about. And I'm sure lots of you. And, you know, I think it can be done. There's enormous hope and possibility there.
Okay, so Peter and then Maria. Oh, sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just interesting because this is a bit of a passion of mine about raising awareness, and it just made me think of something. We had an advertising person here earlier, I don't know if they're still here, but we all talk about not seeing it out there, and yet there are places that we could be advertising out there. Rather than doing it through the Green Party or the Lib Dems or even the local council, it doesn't cost an awful lot of money to hire out the bus shelters and so on that the council have out there. It would need some fundraising, but there might be, we talk about it so much, but a small group of us bringing together some of the different groups could actually fundraise, do some crowdfunding, get some clever advertising person to work with us on some adverts and put stuff out there. Now, yeah, it would cost some money, but, you know, money is available in this district, and I'll be very interested in that if anybody wants to talk to me about it.
comment on a lot of the things we're talking about with awareness involve normalisation of these conversations in a way that I don't think exists now. And I think part of that is that these conversations are hard. They're hard to have, they can be hard emotionally, and people worry about seeming weird if they're the person that wants to talk about the climate crisis when everyone else was talking about what they did at the weekend. So it was just to say that on the Sustainable St Albans website, there's freely available a really lovely material called Climate Conversations, which is a completely standalone pack that anyone can use. You don't need to be a climate expert. It takes about 2 hours, or you could do it in 2 one-hour lunch hours and have a climate conversation. And I know it can be hard to know how to bring that up. So given that at the end of September it's the Great Big Green Week, maybe everybody here could think, right, during the Great Big Green Week, let's use that as a hook to have a climate conversation in our school, in our church, in our lunch hour, with my book group, whatever group you're in, and kind of try and practice normalising having these conversations so that they get a bit less scary each time.
Just to come back on the lady at the back about putting up adverts locally, really inspiring. It will cost a fair bit. Can I, at this point, sort of adverting back to what I said towards the end of my talk earlier, make the point that a lot of people in this room are working really hard already in this area, and some are thinking about working harder. There will also be some people in the room who have real money, quite a lot of money rolling around the St Albans area. Some of us are struggling with the cost of living crisis, some of us aren't. I'm not, for example. My salary's perfectly good. I have an excess from what I need every single year. I know that there are at least 2 people in this room who have given really huge amounts of money to the kinds of causes that we're talking about, to ideas like the one we just heard. So this is the kind of conversation, it's one of these difficult conversations. English people don't like talking about money. Luckily I spend quite a lot of time in America. So I'm just going to do a bit of a kind of Bob Geldof and say, maybe the way that some of you can contribute best to this is by digging very deep in your pockets. Because, this is not going to be sorted by increasing your standing order to Greenpeace from £4 a month to £5 a month. It's not going to do it. So if you're one of those people, and there will be some of them in the room, do think about actually getting really, really serious and thinking not about sums like £4 or £5, but sums like £40,000 or £500,000 or whatever it is that you have available. That's one of the ways that we're going to actually get through this, if we are going to get through it. So if that applies to you, then have a ponder.
Yeah. Yes, Maria.
I'm not very good with these. Okay, I just want to say that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you may call us Mormons, we have what we call 72-hour packs. And this is something we should all have at home, a 72-hour pack. We never know when we're going to be inundated by a flood. It could have been maybe a river nearby or some other thing, but it's just something that we can all start to think about. And the more that we do that, the ones that are aware in this room, the more we'll be able to have that normalising conversation with other people. Because what I have seen is that on TV, when people have got stranded, they've had nothing with them. We can actually prepare. And I want to thank you, I don't know your name, I'm sorry, but thank you so much for raising that about what's going on in the rest of the world and how we can have those conversations. I'm taking that back to my church. So, really brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter.
I think I'll move away from this because I don't think it'll work.
Do you need a mic over here?
I'm retired now, but a background in planning transport systems, and I'm concerned. I was at a conference yesterday. Means that we understand carbon zero, and the government's acting on that, and I can assure you there's plans being done. Resilience, I think, is far more neglected. In the late 90s, we used to draw maps of the London Underground to show where, if flooding occurred, what they had to do. That was in the late 90s, a map which would show the sequence of closing down the Underground by flooding. Could you please explain to me the extent to which government is identifying the vulnerable parts of our society, both in its macro level, food supply, water supply, etc., and really getting to grips with that, because I've seen no public evidence that that's happening. We've had emergencies like COVID. It seemed to me we hadn't prepared. We've now got the Ukraine. I don't think we've prepared for a grain problem. And these are small problems compared with what climate change would bring. If you believe it's 5 minutes past, I can tell you as a civil engineer, things take 20 years to change. So if you're not planning it now...
I mean, the honest answer and the short answer is I can't yet point you to where that work is being done, because I have no idea whether it is being done, and if it is being done, who's doing it. I can certainly put that question to Sir Patrick Vallance when he does that event on the 20-something of July, and I've made a note of it down here. I mean, I do really worry about the capacity of our country. I won't get too party political, but whoever's in government, I really worry about preparedness for any kind of crisis. I mean, you know, there was supposed to be a pandemic plan, and it clearly hadn't been updated, and it had been shelved, and it was out of date. Our NHS clearly was very under-resourced. I mean, the temperature was pretty hot last week, wasn't it? You know, and there was one day when I had to go to Suffolk to see a family member quite urgently, and I was getting messages from my mum saying, well, don't use this road because it's melting. I mean, there were 2 roads in Suffolk that were melting, and you think, blimey, it wasn't even like that hot. You know, talking in climate terms, it wasn't that hot last week, and yet there are still roads that, you know, were being closed down completely. And so you're thinking, if that's the state we're in already, you would hope that someone somewhere was looking at our entire transport network, not just railways and not just roads, but looking at our entire transport network and looking at our entire food supply network and our entire water supply network, and making those kind of contingency plans. I'm not aware of whether that's happening or not, but I could certainly ask the question.
I know a little bit about this because I follow the work of the Committee on Climate Change quite closely, and because of the work I do in the area of adaptation. And I can tell you that your question is extremely pertinent. I mean, the analysis that's been done by the Committee on Climate Change is that on adaptation, we are pitifully prepared in this country. We're missing virtually every single target and every single measurement that they offer. And some of them we're missing by absolutely miles. And it's very worrying, very disturbing. And the beauty of it, as a number of us now have said, the beauty of it is if we move to actually start to prepare and get more resilient to the extent that we can, because it's going to be bloody difficult given what's coming down the pike at us and how unprecedented a lot of it's going to be. The beauty of it is that if we do that, it really concentrates our minds. You know, one of the things that psychologists will teach you, which is a bit counterintuitive, is that the best way for people to get into a position of being able to believe something is often for them to act as if they already believe it, right? If we start acting as if we are vulnerable, which we are, then we'll actually start to believe that we are vulnerable. So in other words, adaptation, if we start to get serious about adaptation, and we can initiate some of this from the bottom up, that's part of what climate emergency centres are about, and HEART. If we do that, we are contributing to changing the whole mindset such that people will then start to take mitigation more seriously. Because we will then be enabling people to see by their own actions and their own growing sense of their own vulnerability that, my God, this is real, this is serious, we've actually got to address the root causes as well.
Hi. Yeah, as well, that word was your last little bit was as well. I think that's one of my concerns is resources and capacity, because most of us are doing a lot or more than sometimes people should be, and burnout and the consequences to people's long-term sustainable life is my concern, but also I'm seeing it in Extinction Rebellion. But in workplaces, our societies are extractive and not just of resources, but of people. So I suppose my question is, when you're already doing so much in different areas that are already so important, how do you then do more? And as we say, we want to engage people to help, but that takes more resources, and also the government and normal media channels that we can access can just black you out, and then those few people who are holding that work are burning out. So how, in a system that is completely, almost counter, do you sustain the people who are already doing while asking them to do more?
Well, I'll just make a little start on that. What a great question, so important. Burnout is something which a number of us in the room have probably experienced. I certainly have. I want to make one simple point about it. The 5 to midnight story, the old story, is a recipe for burnout, right? Because it tells you, oh, just keep on going, just one more push and we'll get there. You know, we can do it. Just try harder, just try a bit harder, and everything's going to be fine. When you switch to 5 past midnight, you're switching to a different space. You're switching to a space of accepting, actually, a lot of the damage is already done. You're switching to a space where you have to spend some of your time actually facing what is, actually staring into the abyss. It requires you to do psychological work of one kind or another. In the Moderate Flank Incubator, we call it collective inner work, because we need to do it together. And that gives you a built-in buffer against burnout. So that is one of the things I would say is absolutely crucial here. If you make that switch from 5 to midnight to 5 past midnight, it's not about saying, oh, now you can just give up and do nothing. But it is about saying, actually now you have to take more care of yourself. We have to take more care of ourselves. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It is essentially a new permanent condition that we are in. That's why even the term climate emergency is actually a bit misleading. And I've written about this. You can look it up if you're interested. Because calling it an emergency makes it sound as though it's something that could be fixed or solved. And that's not what it is. It is a new permanent condition that we are in, and we have to look after ourselves in it.
I would say there are 2 sides to this. I think that answer was very much around mindset and sort of well-being and how you sort of reframe things in your mind. I would also say there's a very practical thing you can do, which is decide that you're not going to do more, but recruit others to the cause. When there's more to be done, you know, every sort of individual one of us can only do so much, right? You know, I like to think that I'm busy, but even I have my limits. You know, we all have to just find other people to get involved. So rather than saying, here are 10 things that have to be done, how am I going to do them all? Say, what are the 3 things I'm going to focus on? Then who can I find to run with the other 7? Build the team.
Brilliant. And the phrase that I love is, there's a difference between good work and your work. One of the things we do in Heart is we run retreats, 4-day retreats, which are designed to do exactly that. So to find out, to really uncover what is yours to do, something that sustains you psychologically and emotionally. And, you know, you can't do everything, but something that gives your life meaning, and you can do it with gusto and passion and well-being, and keep on going without getting burned out. And that's not, you know, I'm not saying it's not challenging, but it feels really good to do that. So we have one more here, I think, and then I think we've worn them out.
There have been two major pushes in the past. One was the Manhattan Project to produce nuclear weapons during the Second World War, and the other one was the Apollo program. And each time it was spend the money, send us the bill. Science, changing the subject very slightly, has an economic multiplier said to be 20. Now I'm sure that's the middle of actually a very large range. There have been 3 reports, as far as that I'm aware of, which looked at the economic multiplier for the Apollo program. And it was either 3.5, 7 or 14. That's how well we know the subject. When I was talking about this to John Zarnecki, as professor, and he's made the point, we don't have another planet on which to try the control experiment. In other words, don't go to the moon. I don't know what the time lag is with the economic multiplier. My best guess is it's somewhere between 5 and 7 years, but if it could be 3 years, it could be 10 years. I've got no real idea. I think the government should go ahead and push really hard and say, there's the job, go and do it, send us the bill.
Well, let me make one observation about that, which is, I'm sure in some sense you're right, and obviously we need an Apollo Earth project, and obviously there are all sorts of good economic consequences that could come from doing that. But there is a fundamental difference, a very difficult difference, from our situation to the kind of situations you're talking about, or to the situation of FDR in the 30s, which is often invoked. If what we do in response to this crisis is create more economic growth as a result, then we are adding to the problem, right? That's why we're in an unprecedented situation, right? Because we're in a situation where what we actually need to do is create some kind of culture somehow of sufficiency, of enough, give ourselves some kind of sense of limits, realize that actually we are breaking planetary boundaries, and that if we do stuff that expands the economy, even if the stuff that we do is good, then we're actually just digging our own grave in the process. So that's part of how the situation is so challenging. And again, this is a very difficult challenge for politicians who are completely born and bred on the idea of growing the economy, and the media is still hooked into that idea. Growing the economy is exactly what is destroying us.
We are going to get into some heavy philosophical arguments very late in the day. I mean, first of all, I would say, as a politician, I'm not hooked on the concept of GDP. I think GDP is an indicator. It should be one of about 10 different indicators. I would like us to take the approach of New Zealand, where there are multiple indicators around well-being and longevity and inequality between rich and poor, and GDP could be one of those indicators, but it certainly shouldn't be put on a pedestal as it has been. I think there's an interesting debate around growth. I'll try and keep my comments very brief on this. I think there is a distinction between economic growth and resource utilisation. It is possible that somebody who becomes more skilled at building environmental projects can make more money as a result, and that is still economic growth, but it could be done in a way that reduces the amount of environmental resource they're using. So personally, I get concerned when growth and resource use are sometimes conflated. Sure. I guess the last point I would take from the comment is that we talk about economic multiplier. I think one of the issues that isn't being looked at properly, particularly in relation to adaptation, is innovation and the entire system around innovation. So if we are going to, many of the solutions to tackling the climate emergency and being prepared for it, as it's happening, is going to require innovative solutions. And there are things like our certification systems. This is the kind of wonky stuff I'm into these days. If you want to certify a new brick that's been made of miscanthus, who's going to certify it? Well, at the moment, you know, the BRE, British Research Establishment, right here in this St Albans constituency, doesn't have the authority or the resources to set up a system by which it can test a brick made of miscanthus. If we could start building homes from miscanthus, which is almost like a kind of miracle crop that sucks up, you know, it has fantastic sort of carbon sequestration, and it also absorbs CO2. If we can grow the stuff, we can cut it down, we can turn it into a brick and start building eco-homes out of it, brilliant, but nobody knows how to certify the brick. So actually there's loads of stuff that has to be done very, very quickly to actually enable us to innovate and certify that new innovative projects are safe to use. So I sort of agree that there are sort of lots of different things we could be doing to have multiplier effects, but that also means you have to change the entire mindset of your regulatory system in order that you can actually accelerate the speed at which you are approving and testing innovative new solutions.
Thank you so much. Whew. Well, I think we're full up. Thank you so much. So just to reiterate before I thank our wonderful panellists, what will be happening after today is we will send you an email in the next days. You will have a copy of all the output from today. You will have a copy of, look at that wonderful thing at the back. Just amazing. I think she's done that before. And you will also get a copy of Brian's film when he's edited it, so you'll be able to watch the talks, hopefully without too many squeaks and other special effects. Yeah, I just want to say thank you again. I want to thank all the hosts and facilitators who came along today. Did a fab job. I want to thank Brian and Emma. I want to thank my colleagues in Heart Community Group, Chantal and Kate. And our wonderful panellists, Rupert, Daisy, Ruth and Catherine, thank you so much. Thank you. So we look forward to engaging with you further and staying in touch, staying connected. Thank you for everything you're already doing and look forward to seeing you soon. Au revoir. Bye-bye.